بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Number 10, another favor through which the esteem of the Prophet ﷺ is established is the stones greeting him and the palm trunks sighing for him, and such events are not established about any of the other prophets. Sheikh Esteem ibn Abdul Salam rahmatullahi alayhi, he mentions how the Prophet ﷺ's nubuwwah and risala was acknowledged not only by the humans of that time, but also by what we would perceive to be lifeless entities. And he relates and he indicates towards two incidents that took place. One is with respect to the Prophet ﷺ and the hadith of Muslim, in which the Prophet ﷺ said that I recognize the stone that when I used to cross by it, I would hear after passing it, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this is related pre-nubuwwah, before the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was granted prophethood. And the commentators have two opinions with respect to this. One opinion is that this was a stone that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would pass by, and we don't know where it is. And a second opinion that's given is that this stone that the Prophet ﷺ is referring to is Hajar al-Aswad itself. So when the Prophet ﷺ would pass by the Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone that's now embedded in the Kaaba, that the Prophet ﷺ would hear it saying to the Messenger ﷺ, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah. However, this isn't limited to this one incident. Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he relates that I remember that I was traveling with the Prophet ﷺ, and we went to a local neighborhood outside of from where we were. And I remember every time the Prophet ﷺ faced a stone or faced a tree, that it said, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah, and I heard it myself. So the Prophet ﷺ, Sheikh Esteem ibn Abdul Salam, he mentions and he says that one of the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preferred the Prophet ﷺ and granted him this high esteem, that we established this from, is that the Prophet ﷺ was acknowledged, his prophethood was acknowledged by what we deem to be lifeless entities like stones, etc. The second incident that he refers to is the sighing of the date palm. And that's recorded by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah in his Sahih amongst others, in which the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, they mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ in initial Islam, in Madinah al-Munawwara, when he used to deliver sermons, he would stand next to a date palm, a tree, the date tree. And while standing there, the Prophet ﷺ would then deliver a lecture. So the narrator of the hadith says that we said to the Prophet ﷺ, shall we not build you a mimbar, a pulpit, so that you can sit, and on that, after sitting, you can then deliver the lecture instead of standing. So the Sahaba Karam, Ridwanullahi ta'ala ajma'in, were very conscious of not causing or not becoming the means of discomfort to the Prophet ﷺ. So they thought to themselves that it would be more comforting to you, Ya Rasulullah, if you sat on the pulpit and delivered the lecture instead of standing against or near the date palm. So the Prophet ﷺ agreed, and a mimbar was constructed for the Prophet ﷺ. So it comes in the hadith that the very first time that the Prophet ﷺ sat on the mimbar to deliver the sermon to the Sahaba Karam, Ridwanullahi ta'ala ajma'in, people in the gathering began to hear a weeping and crying sound. And so when an ear was sort of lent to where this weeping and crying was coming from, it became very noticeable that it was coming from the date palm, or from the direction of the date palm. The hadith in Bukhari mentions that the Prophet ﷺ then descended the actual date palm, and the wording of the hadith is فَقَدْ صَاحَتْ سِيَاحَ السَّبِي, that the date palm was then weeping like a child. So initially it was just making moaning sounds, and then it started to sound like a crying sound. And the riwayat mentioned, and this is the riwayat of Bukhari, that it began to cry like a child weeps and sobs. So the Prophet ﷺ then descended the mimbar, and he made his way to the actual date palm. And in the hadith it says, the Prophet ﷺ embraced the actual date palm, and he held on to it, and he began to console it. And then he turned to the direction of the Sahaba Kiram Ridwanullah Tajma'een, and he said to them that because it would be not in proximity of me whilst I was delivering the sermons, and it wasn't able to listen directly in proximity the teachings of Islam. This is why it's showing such emotion, that I am not going to be standing next to it anymore. So in that loss, it is crying to this level. And another variation of the hadith, not in Bukhari but other narrations, it mentions that the Prophet ﷺ said that had I not consoled the date palm, then it would have carried on crying until the day of judgment. Such is the effect that it would have felt of me not being near it whilst delivering the sermon, that this crying would have been heard right up until the day of judgment. So Sheikh Izzuddin ibn Abdul Salam establishes just through and there are many, many, many other ahadith that where again, in our eyes, non-living entities acknowledge the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ. Once the Prophet ﷺ was traveling and he came across a Bedouin, and he invited the Bedouin to Islam. And the Bedouin said to the Prophet ﷺ, looking around, that fine, I'll believe you, but who's going to testify for you? Who's going to back up what you say? Because nobody was traveling with the Prophet ﷺ in terms of an entourage. It was just one or two Sahabis. So he said, other than those that are with you, who will testify for your prophethood? So the Bedouin was like, the reason for asking was that you're not going to be able to provide me an answer. You're not going to be able to give me someone who testifies on your behalf. So the Prophet ﷺ says that if that tree comes and testifies, will you believe me? So the Bedouin says, yes, of course I'll believe you. If the tree testifies, then of course. So the riwayat mentions that the Prophet ﷺ then beckons towards the tree. And the tree uproots itself from the ground. And it almost walks on the roots to the Messenger ﷺ. And in front of the Bedouin it then says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa annaka Rasulullah. That I bear testimony that Allah is the true deity worthy of worship, and that you, Muhammad ﷺ, the Messenger of Allah. After saying this, it goes back and it goes into the ground. So the Bedouin looks at the Prophet ﷺ start and says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammad Rasulullah. And he accepts it. And there are many, many, many different sort of acknowledgements from non-living entities, from animals, etc., that showed that they acknowledged the Prophet ﷺ as the Prophet of Allah. The very famous account of Uhud, the Prophet ﷺ on one occasion said, Uhudun jabalun yuhibbuna wa nuhibbuhu. That the Mount of Uhud is the mountain that has love and affinity to us, and we love it as well. And on one occasion, the Prophet ﷺ was stood on Uhud with Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, with Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala, and Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala, and the mountain began to shake. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he struck down with his foot on the mountain and says, Uskun ya Uhud, that calm yourself, Uhud. فَإِنَّ عَلَيْكَ نَبِيٌّ وَصِدِّيقٌ وَشَهِيدًا. Because on top of you there is a Prophet of Allah, there is the Siddiq of Allah, and the two martyrs referring to Umar radiallahu ta'ala and Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala. So all different types of things acknowledge the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sheikh Izzuddin ibn Abdul Salam says this isn't established from any other Prophet. So because of this, there is an esteem of the Prophet ﷺ that is not being afforded to anybody else. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant me the understanding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of you the understanding. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khairan.